Chapter 281. Raven became nervous after hearing this. She looked at her and said, "Sherry, why did Mr. Goldman want to see Maisie? Does he think that Maisie is cheating too?" Sherry smiled with a little embarrassment. "Of course not, don't worry." Sherry brought Maisie to the office, opened the door, and saw Nolan sitting on the couch with his legs crossed while Hans and Rowena were also there. After Maisie appeared, Nolan ordered the two of them indifferently, "You two, go out first." Rowena took a glance at Maisie before leaving with a sulky face when she turned around. Sherry, who was the last to leave, closed the door of the office. There were only the two of them left in the office now. "Why are you standing so far away from me?" Nolan squinted and patted the space next to him. "Come and sit here." "No, this is a training camp. And there are so many people here. It's not good to be seen by others." Maisie refused. Nolan's thin lips were pursed tightly, and his gaze was fixed on her for a while. "Do you want to come over by yourself, or do you want me to carry you over?" Maisie was rendered speechless. Just as she walked up to the sofa, Nolan reached out and hauled her into his arms. Maisie was taken aback for a split second and struggled. "Let me go, are you still angry?" Nolan wrapped his arms around her waist, held her tightly, and buried his head beside her neck and on her clavicle. His breath sounded when he spoke. "I've already figured out the matter of the jade ring. That jade ring was my apology gift to you. But I didn't know what you would like at that time, so I asked Rowena." Maisie's eyelashes drooped, and her tightly pursed lips opened slowly, seemingly a little dissatisfied. "Why would you ask her?" I thought you women would have quite similar tastes." Nolan started acting a little awkwardly. He had never given any woman gifts, and he did not know what women liked. Thus, he wanted to give her jewelry. But his young wife was a designer and knew more about jewelry than he did. That was why it was extremely difficult for him. Maisie had nothing to say. No matter how angry Maisie was deep down, Nolan's sincere expression while he was admitting his mistake, coupled with his explanation. Her anger was already half dissipated. "He's definitely an idiot, right?" Nolan seemed to have realized something, and a hint of glee beamed from his half-closed eyes. "Are you jealous, because you thought I gave Rowena that jade ring?" The best explanation for her furious reaction is that she's jealous. Maisie snorted and turned her face away. "What's there to be jealous about? The person who can't get what she wants is her, and not me. She was still showing it off to me a few days ago." As soon as the words got out of her mouth, Maisie subconsciously felt that those words sounded a little inappropriate. "Why did that sound like I'm showing off?" Nolan raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Yeah, it's you who got me, and not her. There's really no need for you to be jealous." Maisie pushed him gently. "Can you let me go first? This is still an office. If someone were to see us, this is Hans's office. No one will come here." Nolan gave her slender neck a light peck and lowered his voice. "I miss you very much." Maisie's cheeks felt hot as if a warm current was surging back and forth in her body. "I've only not seen you for a while. You've lost weight." Nolan slipped his hand into her coat. Maisie was so piqued that her cheeks flushed, and she lifted her hand. "You bastard." Just as she was about to hit him, he grabbed her arm. Her arm felt as soft as fur. He smirked blankly while he was caressing her. "Be good." When looking at Nolan, who was teasing herself with a solemn appearance, the phrase "barbarian in a suit" suited him a lot. Chapter 282. Nolan swiftly undid her tights. However, his eyes dimmed all of a sudden. The tip of his tongue was resting on his back molars, and he seemed to be thinking about something. Maisie, who noticed that the situation was dreadful, wanted to escape his grasp. Unfortunately, he turned over and pressed her against the couch. Maisie dashed back to the dormitory wrapped in her coat but ran into Rowena and Winona on her way back. Rowena noticed that Maisie's cheeks looked rosy while her hair was a little messy, not to mention that she was wrapping herself in a coat. She could imagine what had happened after Maisie went to see Nolan. The hatred that flashed across her eyes disappeared in an instant. The time is still not right. I can't make any move just yet. Winona did not like Maisie initially, and her resentment for Maisie was even more pronounced. Especially after Maisie won the assessment. Thus, when she saw her sneaking back, she could not help but mock her. Humph, judging from that look, somebody must have gotten it on with some filthy man, right? Maisie's eyes turned gloomy slightly. She only gave Rowena a sideways glare but ignored Winona and left the scene. Winona, who was ignored, took advantage of Rowena's presence to jerk her coat. When the coat was ripped off, there were quite a few hickeys on her neck. Rowena's hands, which were resting on the sides of her body, clenched tightly. She never knew that the cold and indifferent Nolan had such a wild and lustful side. Winona's expression gradually became contemptuous upon seeing that. Oh, I knew it. You bitch, you actually got it on with some random man. How dare you do so in the training camp? Just how promiscuous can you be? Winona, you're always calling others bitch. Is that all the vocabulary that you have mastered? And who are you referring to as a bitch? Maisie smirked at her. Don't you know that you're the bitch that I'm talking about? Why would you pretend that you don't know that? Winona glared at her exasperatedly. Maisie smiled again. Okay, I know now. The bitch was talking about me. Winona found out that Maisie had played her subconsciously, and her expression turned gloomy and sullen immediately. How dare you slander me? There had always been someone that would forget how much it hurt as soon as their scars had healed, and Winona has long forgotten how she was threatened by Maisie back then as she stepped forward in an attempt to slap Maisie. The slap was intercepted. Maisie grabbed her wrist and looked at her indifferently. Do you think my arm has been crippled, and I can't hit you with only one hand? Maisie raised her left hand and slapped Winona's cheek accurately and rapidly. Winona's head turned vigorously to the left, and she was stunned. Rowena only thought that Winona deserved to be beaten because she could not even stop herself from babbling nonsense. However, Maisie was arrogant enough to do so under her nose. She walked up to Winona and said to Maisie, Ms. Vanderbilt, what Winnie just said is indeed a little harsh. You can just teach her a lesson verbally. Is there a need to slap her? Winnie? Maisie narrowed her eyes, and the corners of her lips twitched coldly. It turns out that Miss Summers knows Winona? So does how Nolan got to know about the incidents where I accidentally trespassed into the restricted area, and even the matter between Francisco and me have something to do with the two of them? Rowena was stunned. But a smile appeared on her face very soon. I know most of the people in this training camp. Is this very strange? Who do you know has nothing to do with me, Miss Summers, but I hope that you won't intervene in too many things. This isn't the first time I'm teaching Winona a lesson. A person who has a filthy mouth deserves an ass whooping. Maisie twisted her wrists while she glared at Winona coldly. Seeing that Rowena did not dare to talk back to Maisie, Winona pulled her aside and said, Rowena, you don't have to be afraid of this woman. Isn't this woman just a little stronger than an ordinary woman? But she's nowhere near as prestigious as you. You have Mr. Goldman's support. Chapter 283. Rowena's expression changed slightly. This woman's mouth is really filthy. I would naturally feel very proud when she said so in front of others. But saying this in front of Maisie will only humiliate me further. Winona did not notice the change in Rowena's expression and continued to glare at Maisie fiercely. Let me warn you, Mr. Goldman is currently in the training camp, so no matter how badass you are. If you dare to make a move on me now, Another slap stunned Winona completely. How dare she? A smile appeared on Maisie's lips. Are you threatening me? Do you want Miss Summers to get Mr. Goldman here to back you up? But let me make it clear to you now, once and for all. I'd still slap you even if Mr. Goldman were standing here now. Do you want to try it out? You. Winona wanted to say something, but it felt like someone was shoving the words back down her throat. Why does Maisie have the guts to act so presumptuously? Whose support does she have? You won't get beaten at all if you actually know when to not speak like what you're doing now. Maisie chuckled. She then turned to Rowena. Miss Summers. Do you think so too? The murderous coldness was suppressed at the bottom of Rowena's eyes and did not overflow. She only gave off a faint smile. Ms. Vanderbilt, you're a smart woman, but we're currently in a training camp. So you should obey the rules too. Maisie also understood what she meant by that. She was asking her to behave herself in the training camp and not bring up Nolan. Maisie snorted. Abiding by the rules is always the right thing to do. But it depends on who's gone too far and pushed her luck too. I would never offend anyone if they didn't come at me first. However, I'll never stay down and do nothing if someone has chosen to offend me in the first place. Maisie took a glance at both of them, turned around, and left the scene. Rowena stared at Maisie's back, her gaze looking cold and terrifying. As soon as Maisie arrived at her room, she found a large blue enchantress bouquet and some valuable supplements lying on her bed. Raven appeared out of nowhere and came to Maisie's side with a smile when she was still in a trance. How is this? Are you shocked? Maisie frowned slightly. It's not Nolan's style to send me flowers and healthcare products. As such, she asked, who sent me these? Who else could it be? It's, of course, Mr. Boucher. Raven smiled and added, Mr. Boucher heard that you've injured your arm in the ring and was worried about you, so he asked me to bring you these gifts. Maisie took a deep breath as she felt a little helpless. Return these, I can't accept any of them. They're all too valuable. I've done nothing to deserve all these gifts, and I don't plan to have anything to do with Francisco in the future. Seeing that Maisie did not want these, Raven looked puzzled. But Maisie, these are all chosen and prepared meticulously by Mr. Boucher. Don't you like them? Maisie wanted to say something, but she thought of shattering Francisco's determination and said, yes, I don't like them. So please return them. Ah, all right then. Raven felt that it was a pity, but she could only bring the gifts back to Francisco. In the afternoon. In the Goldman family estate. Titus was playing chess with his son in the pavilion located in the courtyard. Rowena and Hans walked in from the outside. Hans was here to report Maisie's assessment results to Titus. The old man was a little surprised after hearing this. This woman seems to be quite skillful, huh? Sitting across from him, Mr. Goldman Sr. said with confidence, my son and I both share the same vision. There's no way that it'd be bad. He was extremely satisfied that Maisie was his daughter-in-law as she suited the title more than anyone else. Apart from the fact that she had given birth and raised 3 children for the Goldmans, her talents and abilities also made her the most competent candidate. Hence, even if his father was not satisfied with Maisie, neither he nor his son would change their opinion about her. Rowena pursed her lips tightly as her eyes dimmed. Grandpa, I think that even if Ms. Vanderbilt has won this match, she used a ring as a weapon in a barehanded fight. This alone is very unfair to the opponent. Chapter 284. Hans was a little surprised and turned to look at her. Why would she mention this incident all of a sudden? Rowena exchanged gaze with Hans in order to not let him notice anything odd. I know that Ms. Vanderbilt might lose to her opponent in a barehanded fight. But isn't the match a test of strength? Hans felt that it made some sense when she said that. Titus stroked his beard and nodded. Mr. Goldman Sr. frowned. How can a ring be considered a weapon? Rowena explained cautiously. The ring that Ms. Vanderbilt wore on her finger isn't an ordinary ring. It resembles something that's used for self-defense. It seems to have something sharp hidden in it, and it cuts. Mr. Goldman Sr.'s brows creased as if he was thinking about something. Hans was slightly surprised. So that ring can not only be used for self-defense, but also can be used to hurt others? No wonder Logan said that Maisie hurt her with a ring. Does that mean that Maisie really cheated? Rowena smiled bitterly. Yes, but Nolan was there the other day. So it was not very appropriate for me to expose her when he was around. What? The brat went there too? Titus was not gleeful anymore. That brat actually went to training camp. Is he taking my words seriously? Rowena tried to calm him down immediately. Grandpa, don't be angry. Nolan is only worried about her. Besides, Miss Vanderbilt really has the ability. She's able to protect herself when she's out there. Nolan won't have to worry too much about her in the future. She smiled again after saying that. Although Ms. Vanderbilt might have gone against the rules by winning the match through disagreeable means, it's understandable. However, in order to quell everyone's complaints about this extremely unequal match, I think Ms. Vanderbilt would accept a deduction of 10 points from the 30 points that she attained, right? It might seem that she was speaking for Maisie on the surface, but in fact, she only wanted to make Titus feel even more disappointed in Maisie. She passed the assessment by disgraceful means. Others might not be able to see how filthy it is, but I can. Titus picked up the teacup and took a sip from it. But just as he was about to say something, a tall and well-built figure walked into the pavilion. It seemed that the man had heard what Rowena said just now, and his expression turned gloomy. Winning the match through less righteous means can be considered as outsmarting the opponent. Why should we deduct points for that? Rowena's heart trembled. She faintly realized that Nolan seemed to have seen through all her movements these days. Not only did he personally go to the training camp to witness the assessment, but he also knew that I would report the result to Grandpa at the family estate with Hans. She bit her lip lightly and slowed down her speech. Nolan, the newcomers in the training camp are all complaining about Ms. Vanderbilt's way of winning. All of them think that it's unfair to the opponent, heh. Nolan glanced at her and asked in an indifferent tone, are the fists the only thing that one can rely on to win a fight? Rowena pursed her lips and said nothing. Titus put down the teacup and raised his eyes. Rowena is doing so only to uphold the rules of the training camp. What's wrong with that? Can't we deduct points if someone has broken the rules? Grandfather, have you gone into your dotage? Is there any rule in the training camp that says that members that are fighting in the ring mustn't wear any jewelry? Even though the ring Z wore is a weapon used for self-defense, she only used it when her opponent dislocated her hand. So this shouldn't be considered a violation. Am I right? Titus was taken aback for a split second and became silent. Nolan then continued indifferently. A fight doesn't necessarily have to be won by fists. Sometimes, it can be done through less decent means. Doing anything in our capability in order to secure a victory. Isn't that what my great-grandfather did back then? Does everyone think that my great-grandfather was able to establish such a terrifying reputation in Stossel back then just because he was almighty and powerful? Chapter 285. He became the legend that he is just because of the means he was willing to use. Anyone must know how to act flexibly according to the different environments that they're facing. How can they deal with their opponent if they don't have the means to win? Titus did not want to deal with this anymore and waved his hand. You guys can do whatever you please. Anyway, I only want the grades. Nolan left the family estate and walked to the front of the car when Rowena called him out to stop him. She came behind him. Nolan, what I said back there isn't against anyone. I'm only considering other people's thoughts. Rowena, behave yourself. Don't let me find out that you're plotting things behind my back. Nolan got into the car without turning his head. Watching the car drive away, Rowena was stunned in place. She thought about what Nolan had just said, and her heart shuddered. I haven't done anything against Maisie blatantly. Except for the jade ring. So does he know? The next day, the physical assessment results were announced on the notice board, and a group of trainees was gathered around the notice board, checking the results. While on their way back from the dining hall, Maisie and Raven went to take a look at the results at the notice board. Raven quickly found her name, and the result was 29 points? How could it be 29 points? Raven was puzzled. Z had won, obviously. Seeing this score, Maisie did not experience any emotional ups and downs. This was within my expectations. They deducted 1 point from the 30 points that I scored because of the ring that I wore. However, there are still other assessments. It'll still be enough as long as I strive to score 120 points in total. Maisie saw Logan when she turned around while Logan met her gaze simultaneously. However, the expression on her face did not look very friendly. Logan turned around to leave. Maisie withdrew herself from the crowd, went after her, and stopped her. Logan, can we talk? Logan turned to look at her with her arms crossed in the corridor. What do you want to say to me? I know that the assessment wasn't fair to you, and I didn't mean to hurt you with the ring. But I just had to win. Maisie continued to communicate with her calmly. I won't hinder your future even if I've won in this assessment, because I'll only be here for 4 more days. I'll leave this training camp after I get the results of my assessments. I'm not aiming to become one of the top management as I have my own career out there. I hope you can understand. Logan stared at her for quite a while. Didn't you participate in the assessment to secure a spot in the top management? Maisie shook her head and responded while scrutinizing Logan. I'm not a professional fighter like you. I'm just here to fulfill an agreement. And I'll leave this place as soon as I obtain good grades within half a month. That's why I couldn't get eliminated in our assessment no matter what. Seeing that Maisie was explaining to her so sincerely, Logan felt less unreconciled deep down now, even though her expression did not change. She only wanted to get herself into the top management through the assessments. She would naturally not think about anything else. Maisie heaved a sigh of relief and said slowly, It's not fair to me to be arranged to go against you as I'm not as good as you. Not to mention that your competitor has never been me. You're rather skillful enough to break yourself free from me. Logan had to admit that she had lost in certain areas during the match. Maisie smiled. It was just a fluke. Logan added. Winona is the one who arranged for me to go against you in the assessment. It seems that you've left quite a bad impression on Winona. You might want to always sleep with your eyes open while you're still here. Maisie looked at Logan's back as she walked away. If I were to be one of the cadets in this training camp, I might still be able to make friends with Logan. Chapter 286. As for Winona, it was time to deal with her after she had tried to scheme against her 2 times. Winona walked out of her room and suddenly saw Maisie waiting for her at the stairs. With her arms crossed, she stood there with her body tense. Well, what are you doing here? It was probably because she was alone this time. She usually acted differently when there were others around. Maisie's lips curled as she walked toward her. Winona's back tensed and kept retreating until Maisie pulled her into the woods behind the dormitory. Maisie, if you dare even to touch me, I'm going to. What are you going to do? Maisie blocked her path. Don't worry, I just have a few questions for you. Winona shuddered. She was actually afraid. What do you want to know? Maisie said. Did you bring me to the restricted area because of Francisco? Winona's eyes darted around because she was afraid that Maisie would attack her at any moment, but she still stood straight and replied, So what if I did? Francisco just couldn't stay away from you since you got here and even gave you the chocolate that I gave to him. Chocolate? Maisie remembered. I didn't even touch the chocolate. I can give it back if you want it. No, thank you. He already gave it to you. Winona looked wronged and unhappy. Maisie laughed. Did you arrange for the assessment to be between Logan and me? Winona didn't dare look her in the eye and stopped talking. She told me it was you. You can't deny it. Maisie smiled a pretty smile. But to Winona, it looked sinister. One I just wanted you to lose. Do you know how bad the consequences would have been if these two incidents happened to someone else? Maisie's eyes were cold. Winona, no one is trying to steal Francisco away from you. You don't need to get innocent bystanders involved. Do you think Francisco will pay more attention to you after what you've done? Winona bit hard on her lip. Maisie took her phone out of her pocket. I have 4 days left for the training. If you don't play nice in these 4 days, I'm going to release this recording. You recorded. Winona put out her hand to try and grab it, but Maisie put the phone back into her pocket and raised her brows. I've got the information I needed, and you admitted to it. Just enjoy your time here and don't play any more games with me, or I won't let you off easily. Maisie was leaving when she saw Francisco standing not far behind them. When Winona saw Francisco, she felt like she saw her savior, ran toward him, and hid behind him. Francisco, she threatened me. You saw it. These are the woman's true colors. She's not who you think she is. Francisco wasn't ready for that, so he didn't push away this woman he usually hated. He just stood there staring at Maisie, stunned. He had seen Maisie and Winona going over there and followed along because he was afraid Winona would harm her. But he overheard their conversation. The little goddess he thought he knew was the opposite of what she used to be. She looked frail before. Even though she was cool, she looked like she needed to be protected. Chapter 287. Maisie wasn't worried about Francisco seeing her like that. She smiled and walked toward him, glanced at Winona, who was hiding behind him, and said, "It's true. This is the actual me. I wouldn't let off someone who tried to scheme against me easily." Francisco. Listen, Winona tugged his arm and looked hurt. When Francisco snapped back into reality, he pulled his arm away from Winona, looked at Maisie, and said, "Little goddess, you did that because you were threatened by Winona, right? Do I look like I was threatened?" Maisie's eyes were cold. And she was expressionless. Winona targeted me because of you. I've taken what I needed from her. If she doesn't behave, I'm going to release the recording. Francisco looked at Maisie and felt like he didn't know her. It was probably because he never knew her well enough to begin with. It seemed that from that day onward, Francisco never talked to her even when they met in the canteen. Raven wanted to bump into Francisco, but he never came up to them anymore. She was curious. "Maisie, what's wrong with Mr. Boucher? Doesn't he usually stick to you? Isn't it better like this?" "There's nothing going on between us." Maisie got some food next to the window. Raven stood there, pondering. Hans appeared in the canteen, scanned the crowd, and stopped on Maisie. He walked toward her under the eyes of everyone. "Ms. Maisie Vanderbilt." Maisie just got her food and paused when she realized that he was looking for her. "Yes?" Hans cleared his throat and lowered his voice. "Mr. Goldman is waiting for you in the private room upstairs." When Maisie was leaving with Hans, Raven held her arm. "Maisie, where are you going?" Maisie tapped her shoulder. "I'm going upstairs. Go ahead without me." Seeing her leave with Hans, Raven looked down. She had heard rumors about Mr. Goldman coming to see Maisie. She remembered when Sherry had been looking for Maisie, it was because of Mr. Goldman too. How were they related? Maisie didn't bring you along when she's going to the private room. You see her as a bunkmate. But we don't know what she sees you as. Raven bit her lip. Nonsense. I'm not going to believe you. When she was walking away, Winona's voice floated to her from behind. You probably don't know who she really is, do you? Raven paused. Winona walked to her and put a hand on her shoulder. Rye, we put you in a tough spot because you got too close to Maisie. We have no intention of becoming enemies with you. You see Maisie as your friend, but you probably don't know who she really is, do you? By the way, Winona said into her ear, do you know why Francisco is ignoring her? Why, Raven blurted. Because he knows who she really is. She has kids, but she probably never told you that? Why would a woman with children join the training camp? It's to get to the men. Why do you think she's going to the private room upstairs? Chapter 288. Winona presented all the evidence she had on Maisie because that was exactly how she was. Francisco saw through it too. Winona's words swayed Raven. Even though she couldn't really believe Winona, she really didn't know Maisie that well. Not even the part about her having children. And Mr. Goldman. Was Maisie really who Winona said she was? Did Francisco ignore her because he knew about Maisie? Think about it, Rye. She obviously doesn't see you as a friend since she hid that from you. Why are you still kissing her feet? What Winona said made the already wavering Raven make up her mind. She really did see Maisie as her friend, but Maisie never told her anything about herself. Why would she hide things from her if she treated her as a friend? In the private room, Maisie stared at the healthy meal fully covering the table and the chef standing behind Nolan. If these weren't the campgrounds, she would have thought that she was at a high-end restaurant. In comparison, the meal in her hands was just depressing. Nolan had a hand under his chin as he smiled. I ordered these for you. You've lost weight, so it's time to get some nutrients back in. The meal box in Maisie's hand was taken away while the bodyguard pulled out a chair for her. After Maisie sat down, she looked at Nolan. Nolan. How could I possibly eat all this food? Nolan paused and looked hurt. I feel sad that you've lost weight. It was all because the food at the camp wasn't great. There was not much of his pretty little wife left. What if she was bullied because she became too weak? Maisie was rendered speechless. Nolan was really good at looking innocent. The bodyguard and chef left. Nolan crossed his fingers and put his chin on them while happily looking at Maisie eat. Why are you staring? Maisie felt awkward under his gaze. She wiped the corner of her lips. Just in case there was something there. Nolan's lips curled. It's the shooting assessment tomorrow. Are you anxious? The shooting assessment was split into slow fire and rapid fire. Slow fires were usually 60 shots at a 50-yard distance. The diameter of the 10-ringed bullseye was smaller. After the 60 shots were fired, the results would be based on the total points. This was the farthest distance in shooting events with the highest need for precision and also the most important assessment. Passing these two assessments for someone who had never used a gun was extremely challenging, and then there was the rapid-fire event too. Maisie pursed her lips and averted her eyes. There's nothing to worry about. I might just get lucky and win. Nolan smiled. Z. You wouldn't have come if you weren't confident, would you? Maisie felt a little guilty. I just didn't want to lose. Who gave you that ring for self-defense, the one who taught you self-defense? Nolan's eyes were piercing through her. Her mother was a de Arma. And Marina had dealings with the people from the metropolis in Norwich, so she definitely had a complicated link with them. On top of that, Erwin thought very highly of Maisie. It wasn't difficult to guess that Erwin was the one who had taught her the self-defense techniques. Chapter 289. Since Erwin had taught her self-defense, he probably taught her something else too? Maisie's heart was thumping even though she looked calm upon seeing him staring at her. She still smiled and answered. Uncle Erwin saw how tough it was for me to take care of the kids by myself, so he taught me how to defend myself. That's not too much, is it? Nolan smiled. Of course not. Even if his pretty little wife wouldn't tell him, he would still find out one day. After Maisie finished her meal and left the private room, Winona, who was hiding nearby, was waiting to see which officer she was spending time with. Her expression changed when she saw Hans escorting Nolan out. The man in the room was Mr. Goldman? Huh. That was why she had rejected Francisco. She had her eyes on a more outstanding man. She couldn't blame her for that. Raven was scrolling on her phone in her bed. She quickly hid her phone when she heard someone entering and saw Maisie, who was at the door. When their eyes met, she looked away and smiled. "You're back." "Yes, I'm sorry for leaving you." Maisie wanted to eat with Raven but had to leave her downstairs. She didn't really have a choice since no one at the camp knew about her relationship with Nolan. Raven shook her head. "It's all right." She paused, then asked, "Maisie, do you know Mr. Goldman?" Maisie stopped taking off her jacket and looked at her. "Why do you ask?" Raven smiled and waved her hand. "I heard Chief Lawson asking to see you, and that day, Sherry_Rye, there are certain things that I cannot tell you. And I have my reasons for that. I hope you won't dive too much into it." Maisie looked helpless. She had noticed Raven's change. She wasn't trying to hide anything from her, but it just wasn't the best time yet. She had to get the best results on her own in the camp instead of being someone to Nolan. Raven left it there and smiled. "All right, rest early today. You have an assessment tomorrow." Seeing her lie down, Maisie looked at her for a while before climbing into her own bed. The next day, Raven wasn't around when Maisie woke up. After cleaning herself, she had to get bread from the shop because she was too late for breakfast. However, when she was leaving, she noticed that the passers-by were looking at her weirdly and seemed to be gossiping. She walked to the training field, and a group of girls who were in a discussion suddenly looked oddly at her. She only had 1 point deducted even when she cheated because she has a thing with Mr. Goldman. "I really don't know what she's doing here. Wasn't she unwillingly sent in here by the wife of a married man she was caught with? Really? TSK, Francisco must have been blind to be interested in a woman like that. Some words just had a different taste when they come from different people." Maisie found it funny. She knew that once she was caught knowing Nolan, there would be all kinds of rumors about her, but who had let this slip? Maisie paused. She remembered what Raven had asked her the previous night, and her eyes darkened. Chapter 290. Maisie saw Raven, who was with Winona, among the crowd. Winona saw Maisie, who was standing alone among the people and couldn't help but smile. "I thought you had some tricks up your sleeve. Looks like it was just Mr. Goldman's help all along." Raven didn't dare look at Maisie. Although she hadn't spread the rumor, Maisie still chose to hide things from her even when she asked her about it. Maisie didn't see her as a friend, so why should she still care? When Winona noticed that Maisie was looking at Raven, she put her arm around her shoulder and smiled. "How do you feel when even Rye doesn't believe in you? A woman who goes around seducing men when she already has kids has no place here." Everyone was shocked when Winona said that. "What? She has kids? She looks young. Do you think it was before she was married? I guess she might not even know who the father is." The gossipings surrounded her. Maisie didn't show any emotions because she was so used to being the center of gossip. This was nothing to her. Winona started panicking because Maisie didn't cause a scene. "Why are you staring at me? Everyone is talking about you. How could you still stand around here?" Everyone's eyes were on Maisie while she nonchalantly crossed her arms and said, "You were the one who spread the rumors? So what if I was? Would you dare say nothing is going on between you and Mr. Goldman?" Winona was extremely confident, as if she had managed to trap Maisie. "Weren't you with Mr. Goldman when you went to the private room upstairs the other day? Rye told me that Mr. Goldman told you to see Sherry on the day of your assessment. That explains the marks on your neck that I saw." Everyone's impression of Maisie turned bad, especially when Winona sounded believable. They all started suspecting whether Maisie was actually involved in some unspeakable acts. Winona wasn't afraid to blow things up. "Mr. Goldman belongs to Rowena. Who are you to try and take him away from her?" That's why Rowena said you were sent here, because you were seducing other people's men. Haha, so Rowena was the one who told you? Winona looked a little guilty, probably because of how cool Maisie was, but she stood firm. Don't you know what kind of relationship Mr. Goldman has with Rowena? That makes sense. A woman with children like you who would still get involved with people wouldn't possibly care if Mr. Goldman was with someone else. Winona firmly believed that Nolan and Rowena were the perfect match. Maisie was just a nobody. Maisie suddenly burst out laughing. Winona's face turned blue. What are you laughing about? Let's make a bet, Winona. Maisie crossed her arms and raised her chin a little. If you can get Rowena to admit to me that she is in a relationship with Mr. Goldman, I will kneel in front of you. But if she doesn't, Winona, you should know the price you're going to pay. Well, why should I take your bet? Don't have the guts? Maisie slowly walked toward her. Winona, someone has to be responsible. I gave you a chance, but you didn't appreciate it. Great. There's still an hour until my assessment. Let's have some fun betting. Everyone is here. Aren't you people curious?